Hello everybody, hope you're doing marvelously well. Happy holidays, happy Christmas, happy Hanukkah, happy holidays. So this one's going to be fun. We put together a cover of Don't Stop Me Now, and this is a star-studded cast. We have, of course, on vocals, the rather wonderful Mr. Mark Martell, who I'm sure you know as having an absolutely amazing voice and being quite involved with Queen. Was in the movie, of course, provided a lot of the vocals in that. And on piano, we have the amazing Miss Natalia Posnova, who has this incredible show that she does with a full orchestra called Queen Rhapsody. She is an amazing classical pianist, and she has very kindly agreed to play on this track. On bass, we have my very good friend, Mr. Tony Franklin, who probably, with just the exception of myself, could be the biggest Queen fan in the world. Tony told me that the only reason why he plays bass, or the main reason why he plays bass, is because, of course, of John Deacon. Next up on guitar, playing the solo, we have Mr. Jamie Humphries. Jamie was Brian May's second guitar player, played with Brian for years. Also, I think, is the only other guitar player to play with Queen on stage. So it's a pretty huge deal. Last but no means least is Mr. Pete Riley, the incredible drummer that we've worked with on many of these covers. And Pete is also based in the UK. He's an amazing drummer. He was in a band called Republica. You remember them? And of course, is a top session drummer and an amazing drum educator. So this is a wonderful, wonderful cast of amazing musicians. So we are going to play you now the video with the recording. And then after that, I'm going to break down how we mixed it in a hybrid fashion on the SSL console so you can get an idea of how we do that. So this is our gift for you. You're going to download the Multitracks. You can mix the song for yourself. You can replay it, do whatever you like. And there's going to be a tutorial about how I mixed it in hybrid through my SSL.
Tonight I'm gonna have myself a real good time. I feel alive, and the world, I'll turn it inside out. Yeah, I'm floating around in ecstasy. So don't stop me now. Don't stop me. 'Cause I'm having a good time, having a good time. I'm a shooting star leaping through the sky like a tiger, defying the laws of gravity. I'm a racing car passing by like letting a diver. I'm gonna go, go, go. There's no stopping me. I'm burning through the sky, yeah. 200 degrees, that's why they call me Mr. Fahrenheit. I'm traveling at the speed of light. I wanna make a supersonic man out of you. Don't stop me now. I'm having such a good time. I'm having a ball. Don't stop me now. If you wanna have a good time, just give me a call. Don't stop me. 'Cause I'm having a good time. Yes, I'm having a good time. I don't wanna stop at all. Woo! I'm a rocket ship on my way to Mars on a collision course. I'm a satellite. I'm out of control. I'm a sex machine ready to reload like an atom bomb about to explode. I'm burning through the sky, yeah. 200 degrees, that's why they call me Mr. Fahrenheit. I'm traveling at the speed of light. I wanna make a supersonic woman of you. Don't stop me, don't stop me. Hey, hey, hey. Don't stop me. Ooh, ooh, ooh. I like it. Have a good time, good time. Don't stop me. I'm burning through the La da da da. La da da.
Well, thank you. I hope you enjoyed that. Let's check out the multitracks. So you'll notice I'm not wearing headphones because we're mixing on the console through the speakers. I'm going to talk a little bit about the tracks, but I'm obviously also going to go over to the console. So Erica's going to follow me with the camera and we're going to look at the channel. Okay, let's start off with the drums. So here we are. Now I'm going to admit, we did cheat a little bit. I have no problem with admitting some cheating. Here is the live drums. So I'm just going to play those first of all. So no samples, live drums. And the reason why I cheated a little bit is because I wanted to get it closer to the original drum sound. And, you know, I wanted a little extra energy than the original as well, because as much as I love the original, which is a masterpiece, I think these days people want a little bit more oomph from their drums. And hey, why not? Let's try it. So here is all the live mics. So actually the live kick is pretty darn aggressive, but the addition of the snare samples, I had two. I've got this one, which is the AJ snare, which if you go to producelikeapro.com, when you sign up for the email list, you can download a whole bunch of free samples I've got in there. And what I did on that is I put a schnizzle ton of low end here. Oh, and two things. People always ask why I've got the older version of the plugins on this system. The reason is we run a system with the SSL, which is an older version of Pro Tools. So we have a partition drive, we have a partition which has the latest version of Pro Tools, and then we have the other partition, we have the older version, which we use exclusively through the console. So sometimes you're going to tell when I'm working on the console because you're going to see an older looking graphic. Okay, glad we cleared that one up. All right, so I've got 120 hertz boost here, and I've got like a 7K gentle lift. And the tiniest kind of cut at about 150, you know, almost non-existent. In fact, I could get rid of it. Turn off the EQ. Back on. Now you'll notice it's the Andy Wallace trick. Everybody knows this one. It's been talked about for decades now. But he uses his sample to trigger the reverb. So even if the snare sample is sitting a little bit below the live snare, it doesn't matter. The ambience, the reverb is being triggered off that sample. So for obvious reasons, you don't get hi-hat bleed, you don't get like tom bleed going around the kit. It just creates a nice, consistent ambience. There's been many, many times where I've just used the snare sample to only trigger reverb and not had the snare sample in the mix. So it's kind of a fun thing to do. Here is another snare sample, which essentially is exactly near as darn it the snare that's used in the original song. Now their snare was like very mid-rangey and cutting. Modern snares tend to have a little bit more low end and a little bit more high end. It tends to be a little bit more 1 to 200 and some 7 and above. So what I did is exaggerate with the Puig here. This is the Puig Tech, some 100 hertz. At about there, about 4.5, 5, it's probably about 3 dB of 100 hertz. These are not calibrated from 0 to 10 dB. 10 dB is about 6 dB. So anyway, so it's about, maybe about 3 dB of 100 hertz. And then no boost on the high end at all. And so I blended that. If you blend that with the other sample, you get this. Pretty nice. Then put in the live snare. So with samples, if you're going to place samples in either by hand or not, getting good phase alignment is really, really important. So if I take the live snare here and the sample, you'll see that they're really, really, this could probably move a couple of milliseconds to the left. But you see these peaks and troughs, hopefully that makes sense, are as aligned pretty much as near as darn it. And what does that mean? That means we get really good phase. And the first thing you hear when you get good phase is low end. It's very, very hard to get high end to be like these tiny little frequencies to match perfectly. You can get away with inconsistencies in there. In fact, it really helps to create width quite often. But low end is a no-no. If you get 100% cancellation or even slight cancellation in the low end, it can sound dreadful, absolutely dreadful. But now with these together, so quite a lot of body. Just for schnitz and schniggles, why don't we do this? What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that snare we just did, the sample that's in phase, and invert it. Back to where it was. Other way. You get what I'm talking about? The low end like disappears. Now, I've known mixers, believe it or not, have out of phase snares and out of phase kick drums that they blend in and out to control the low end. I've seen that. Isn't that crazy? Anyway, so to cut a long story short, you can really feel that extra girth going on when it's in phase. So those are the elements of the snare. Let's go to the kick and then we'll go and look on the console. So the kick, I did use a sample on it, but here's the live kick. One of them that Pete recorded, because it's recorded at Pete's studio. Super aggressive, very clicky. Good, but clicky. So the EQ move I did here is like a boost at 60 hertz and then a cut around about 92. Now, somewhere in that 80 to 100 area, I usually dip a little bit out of the kick because I want the bass guitar to bloom in there. But then there's another cut at about 350. And that just pulling that out there, that's where it can get really, really ugly on drums. You know, lots of people, I hear 250, I hear 400, but that area between about 250 and 450, that's why I go to 350, tends to get very ugly and muddy. So I'm pulling that out. I'm not actually adding any click to that because the way that Pete's recorded it, there's a lot of snap. Have a listen. No lack of attack. If I bypass the EQ and this is just flat, so there's quite a lot there. However, it's not entirely bypassed the EQ because I do have it bust, which we'll talk about in a second. So this second kick drum mic, let's have a listen, is all thump. And what we did here is we delayed using time adjuster. I know some people like to pick it up and move it back. Other people like to use drum alignment software. All of those things you can do. I'm always a little careful not to get too crazy with the drum alignment software because, you know, there's low end phase issues, totally understand. But if you get your rooms and everything perfectly in phase, everything starts to sound smaller. Because part of that sort of delay of a room mic, you know, at the back of the room gives width, it gives size, it gives depth. So be careful with that. Experiment. See what mics that you want to phase align perfectly. Time align, I should say. Ones that you want to time align perfectly. Be selective which ones you do that with. Okay, so I've delayed that first mic at the top there, 145 samples. Those two together give us this kick. It's pretty massive. Now I'm doing some crazy EQ on the bussing of it. So these two elements are bussed together. I'm boosting some 57 hertz, basically 60 hertz. I'm cutting some 300 and I'm not doing any high-end boost yet. But if you go to the API, got some 50 boost, some 400 cut, still no high-end boost, and then no high-end boost again on another EQ. Now, you might ask, well, why didn't you do this all on one EQ? Because the console's going to have some as well. This stuff always becomes incremental. Also, like compression, I like the sound of different EQs. Each one does a different thing. The waves traditionally, the Renaissance EQs, have no personality in a good way. They just EQ. They don't like add some personality stuff. But the API has tons of personality. It's an API EQ. It sounds fantastic. And then, of course, Mac DSP, another wonderful company, have a very analog sound. I know lots of my friends, if I say to them, if you could have only one EQ, if they've got stock EQs, which are quite transparent, they might go for something like a Mac DSP because they want a little bit more analog. Brad Wood's a huge fan of them, and we talk about it all the time. But those combination of 3 EQs really give me the kick drum sound that I want. And there's stuff going on in the console as well. But look, let's throw in the kick sample. Here's the kick sample, very Queen. Again, super mid-rangey. On its own, not pretty. All 3 elements together. We're going to go over there in a second and we're going to look at the console. But let's have all the snare elements, all the kick elements together, and you got this. Now, don't forget, you can download all these Multitracks if you haven't already, and you can steal these samples. You can do whatever the heck you like with it. Now, let's go over and look at the console. Okay, so I'm looping just kick and snare at the moment. So let's solo the kick. So here's the kick. You come over here, I'll show you what we're doing. We're doing some pretty excessive stuff because we've already done some EQ and compression over there, but we're getting aggressive. And this is quite often when you're using SSLs, you'll see it's all about the yellow light. And what that is that channel out. And again, I've talked about this when using plugins. If you want to use an SSL style plugin, make sure that you've got the channel out function available to you, because putting EQ into that is what makes it spanky and exciting. So the first thing I've done is I've gone to about 60 Hertz and I boosted it again, quite aggressively. Then I've got some 350 and I've pulled it out again, not as aggressively, but yeah, you know, pulled out some 3. And then I'm at 2.5K and I'm boosting, and a bit of 7K. So I'm basically boosting low end here. So boosting some low end, cutting some low mids, boosting some mid-mids, you know, like 2.5, and then a bit of 7. So I've got these kind of like this action going on. But that EQ boost is then feeding into the compressor. So it's not compressing it first, then applying EQ. It's going into the EQ, it's being shaped, and then being slammed quite aggressively back into the compression. I mean, I'm getting 6 dB worth of compression at its height, which is quite aggressive. But if I take the EQ, no EQ, no compression, EQ in, EQ out, so no EQ. Quite dramatic, just the EQ. Now putting the compression. It's got that really nice professional sound. You know, that one we grew up on, that SSL sound. Now, one more secret. There's a 6 dB worth of compression. We haven't done any compression at that end. Remember this, it's all been EQ shaping. So that's actually really the only real compression going on. But here is one little extra. Now, it's not a huge amount of work I've done on this, but I've got some 63 boosted on the API here, on the 560B, a little cut at 125 where the bass guitar is going to live, and a little cut at 250. And that's it. So basically, again, just a tiny bit of shaping. All of these little incremental things, with the most aggressive EQ being on the SSL, are what is shaping the sound of the kick drum. And yeah, I learned this from, like, if you go and watch like Joe Ciccarelli, he takes like those graphics and they're just like this. He's like boosting and cutting quite aggressive. It really is, you know, you've got guys like him Jack Douglas, all these amazing guys that we know. They do this because they know what they want on the end result and they're fearless. You don't have to track this way, but when you come to mix, don't be afraid to get a little bit aggressive on it. Okay, snare. So here's the snare. Now, this is not the samples playing. This is just the live mics. Now, the live mics here, I've got EQ into compression again, so it says channel out. And I'm doing some boost at about 150. I'm doing quite a lot of boost, about 6 dB at about 5K, and then about 6 dB at about 9K. But I'm also high passing, at about 40. So what I'm doing is I'm boosting some lows down here, about 150. I'm going 5 and 9. So what I'm doing is I'm creating this kind of nice high slope at the top. If I take the EQ out, back in, out. Let's put the snare API in. Too much for me. So I didn't do this. What I normally do is insert this and use the transient designer, but I didn't use it this time. So I'm not going through that EQ. I do it differently every single time, but this time I didn't use the insert. But again, EQ into that. I relied a little bit heavier than I normally would on the samples. We'll bring the samples back in. So here is the kick, the snare, and the samples playing. Now, you'll notice the samples as coming down on a stereo pair of channels here have no EQ or compression. The EQ and compression that I want to do is done inside the box there. Great, let's add some other elements. So the hi-hat, it's pretty cool, it's quite mid-rangey. I personally like my hi-hats quite often. I tape a 57 and something like a 441 or a 451 or something like that together, and then blend the condenser with the SM57. Sometimes we use an SM7. Sometimes we only use a 57 or an SM7. I like it to be a bit more mid-rangey. I want my hats to be not never really been in love with that sort of very 80s kind of like super EQ'd hi-hat. Don't like that. I like a thick sounding hi-hat. So no EQ going on there. Overheads, I have taken out some low lows. I'm high passing at 130-ish. And then I'm cutting a little bit of like 300. Here's before. So a little wah. Now, I really feel like the rooms are a big deal. So often I get rooms that aren't necessarily that big. So I'm not afraid to actually apply a reverb plugin on the room. So here's the room that Pete did for us. Pretty good. First thing I did was add a lo-fi plugin and put some saturation on it, which darkens up the cymbals. That's with, is without. So it goes from psss to this. Now, when I interviewed Jakia, I said to him, oh, I have this idea that on your rooms, you're putting lo-fi, you're putting some saturation on there. And he's like, yeah, that's what I do. And it really helps because it sort of soaks up that extra energy in the cymbals that you don't want. Next, I add a REQ and I get rid of some low lows because I don't need the kick. I don't need a build up of low end. The kick drum has got a lot going on there. Plus, there's a little trick I'm going to show you in a second. So this EQ is pulling out some more low mids at about 350 and it's doing some high passing. Last but no means least is pretty much the magic, which is putting a reverb on it. It's a little bit under a second, 915 milliseconds. Turn it off. Back on. So it sort of made it into a slate room. So now we have a much bigger sounding drum kit. Let's put in all of our elements together. there we have it. A good sounding drum kit. And it's not as much work as you think. The one last thing that we neglected to talk about that I want to have young Eric pick up the camera for the sub. Now, if I float this channel here, so what I've done is I've taken just this channel 1, the kick, out of the SSL master section, but the sub is still going. Now, depending on what you're listening on, you may or may not hear this. This little mic is probably not happening either. But look over here. That's sub frequencies. So that sub is actually, I'm going to bring it down a little bit because it's clipping slightly. But that sub, I don't mind occasional, but that sub is this. It's a DBX 120A subharmonic synthesizer. And I always choose around about 36-ish, about 40. Somewhere between 30 and 40 is the frequencies that I'll generate with the subharmonic synthesizer. And so you've got your boost at about 50 or 60 hertz. Some people go as high as 70 on the kick drum, but let's just say 60 for the sake of argument. And so it's there. I like a little bit of cut in the 80 to 100, just a little bit to allow the bass guitar to breathe. But here in the 30 to 40 area, that's where the sub is coming up underneath and just giving it a little classy underneath. So that adds quite a lot to the drum sound, that just little underneath. I've heard people use subharmonic synthesizers on toms. Now, the reality is there's so many great plugins now that can do this. You could use R-Bass to add some lows to it, all kinds of fun things. Max Bass, there's tons of other plugins. I'm sure you guys and girls will know lots of other things as well. But I've got the hardware, we're mixing hybrid on this song, so it's a great opportunity to show you what we do. So this song's pretty darn simple. It's drums, it's bass, it's piano, it's one guitar solo, lead vocal, and backgrounds. So let's go to the bass. Now, Tony just gave us one input, and it was just the DI. So I'm going to turn off all the EQ, all the compression, everything here, and have a listen. So what we did is we duplicated it. So it's the same element, but it's duplicated. One half, which is this top one here, is only the low end. I am high passing it here at 63. So it's getting out of the way of the kick drum. And then I'm low passing at 200, 210. But I'm also summing these two elements together through a compressor here, an EQ, which is doing a lot of mid-range boost, but then an R bass. What's happening here is it's boosting mid-range, it's high passing, but as soon as you put the R bass on, which is boosting at 80 hertz, it does pull up frequencies either side. It's got quite a wide kind of like boost. And the reason why I like to high pass going into it is it controls it. It just shapes it. That 80 hertz and the width around it does bring up some 50 and 60 quite naturally. But if I didn't high pass, it would just blow up and have too much low end. You might ask, why don't you put it afterwards? I can. I prefer to put it before. It's the same thing I do with reverbs. I'll EQ into the reverb. If I want to do the Abbey Road technique and get rid of the lows and the highs on the reverb, I do it before the reverb because I'm not trying to completely control it so there's no lows and highs. I'm doing it to just reduce the amount of lows and highs. So that's the EQ trick here. EQ into the R bass. So here's the R bass. If I bypass this, back on. Then last but no means least is the MV2. Now, this is only one half of the bass sound. The other half of the bass sound is that duplicated file, that duplicated DI, and it's high passing at about 250, 240, and then boosting some 3K, which is where I like to hear like the pick noise. So on its own, it's quite ugly and nasally. Throw in the lows. And those are the two elements to give us the bass. Now, it's not all about that. Also, there's a couple of extra things going on over here. So let's go and check out the console. Okay, so let's have a look at this bass. Really, honestly, the secret weapon is frankly this. So over here, I've talked about this a couple of times before. This is probably the third time in the 1,300 videos that we've done now. This is probably the third time I've talked about this. It's Pulse Techniques, Pultec. It's made by Steve Jackson. It uses an API 2520, which is a really famous op amps. I think that's right, isn't it? Paul Wolf, you watching? Paul knows everything. Should ask Paul. But anyway, it's freaking awesome. If I take it out, obviously there's a perceptible volume difference there because it's boosting a lot of EQ, so it's making it louder, but I'm sure you can hear that it's more than just turning it up. Listen to it. Okay, now I'm going to put the EQ in. Yes, there's a difference in volume, but the low end is just absolutely massive. It's really, really cool. So what I'm doing is I'm pushing at 100 hertz here, and I'm pushing at 3K a little bit. So that's it. 3K, 100 hertz. 3K gives you the fingers or the pick, depending on how they're playing, which is all the high end I ever need on a bass. I can pretty much roll off after 3K, but it's just huge. And then I am using some EQ, nothing on the low, it's all coming from that. Little bit of boost at about 350, 400, so it's kind of filling in some of the stuff that's pulled out from the drums, just a little bit. And then there's some boost at about 850, and then there's some boost at about 3.5K. And then it's high passed and low passed, you know, taking off some of the super highs, and the low lows, like 20, 30, I don't need that in there. That's the bass. All right, so now we've done the bass, let's look at the piano. Now this is Natalia's piano, which is absolutely superb, incredibly well played. A lot of high-end boost. It's quite a dark sounding piano, and I wanted it to be a little bit more pop and bright. Here's bypassed. And then there's some compression on it here, which isn't doing really much at all except for the really dynamic sections. Even then it's 1 to 2 dB of compression. So the high-end boost, the high passing, which is getting rid of some where the bass is sitting. So if I put Tony in here, so it allows Tony to breathe there, put in the drums. So let's go and check out the piano on the console. All right, so the piano so I already brightened it on the way in there, and there is some brightening going on in here. But honestly, I think the secret is these. And this is not cheap, so don't hate me. It's a pair of Pultecs. Again, Steve, we love him, Steve Jackson. He's one of the nicest guys in the business. And what I'm doing is I'm doing some 100 hertz boost there. And I am doing some 5K boost. And it's pretty broad bandwidth, no attenuation. So it's basically just lots of nice high mids and above and lots of low end. If I bring it out on the insert here, have a listen to it. go back to the fast section now. Here we go. Again, the volume drops, but you can hear all the low end's gone. And a little bit of the high mids has gone as well. So it's bringing some fullness back in there. So you might think I'm a bit crazy because what I'm doing is I'm doing some boosting here, about 250, 300 on the EQ here. I'm doing a little bit of 5K on here, which I'm also doing over there. I'm doing a little bit of like, yeah, it's like I'm doing a bit of 10K and 5K. So it's like high mid again, low end but shaped because there's some high passing going on at about 70, 80. So what I'm doing is like, again, rolling off areas where the bass guitar is going to live and the kick drum's going to live, but boosting some 100, which is pretty wide on that thing, you know, and it gives you sort of like a big low end kind of bump, but also being shaped. I'm a big fan of, you can tell, of like using different kinds of EQs, and they all bring different things to it. All right, now the guitar solo, we're going to give you, it was printed in stereo, has a stereo effects, very, very subtle. You could choose to use both channels. We have pan left and right, or you could just use one and put your own effects on it. Also, we're going to give you the DIs. So with the DIs, you can do whatever you like if you want to reamp. Now, Jamie was instrumental in creating the Brian May guitar sounds on Amplitude. He, being a Brian May aficionado, having worked with Brian in many different environments, really understands Brian's sound. And so these Amplitude sounds are his sounds. Here is the solo. Now, the strange thing is, when Jamie gives me guitar sounds, they're usually not overly bright, even though they're using an Amplitude plugin. There's an assumption that, oh, it's digital, it must be like overly bright. I usually end up doing some more analog brightness by using the SSL. So as you can see here, there is zero, nada, no EQ going on, and not even any in the bus itself here. We got a little bit of reverb down here, which is set to 3/4 of a second. And that's our guitar sound. The EQ and additional compression is going on over on the console. So let's check that out. The guitar is playing. Solo it. Now it's kind of scratchy and aggressive, which solo probably a little much, but in the track, so lead guitar here, EQ in is a little bit about 250 to about 250 on the low end, but it's being high passed at about 80. So there's no low-lows really going on in that, get it out of the way. There's a boost at 5K. There's another boost at about 3K. So it's like some mid-range boost, some aggressive mid-range boost. But there's a little 2K kind of cut, I think. Oh no, on this one I'm going in at about 900, 1K, just like a little bit of taken out. So it's really kind of boosting high mids and high end, but not an excessive amount. And wiping off super lows and adding a little bit like 250 at the bottom, just a bit of girth. You know, I'll take it in and out. This is out. In. Just adds a little bit more aggression to it. Out. I'm on the fence. I'm on the fence. I think Jamie was really concerned about his sound. He wasn't sure if it was the right sound, but what's weird is I think it's pretty darn good. I've taken the EQ out and just left a little tiny bit of compression on it. We do have a reverb going on it as well. The deverb, set to 3/4 of a second. I'm actually going to turn that up. And the way the reverb's being sent is the guitar that's on the left and the guitar that's on the right is sending the reverb opposite. So it just creates a little extra width because you have a sound over here and then you have its reverb on the other side, then you have a sound over here and its reverb on that side. So it's pretty darn cool. The lead vocal was cut by Mark on his Townsend mic. I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. We were in Blackbird about 2 months ago now, month and a half ago, and we shot out every single mic you can imagine. We shot out the mint condition 47, C12As, because we'd seen Freddie had used C12As, so we did that. And you name it, SM7s, because Mark was up until that point singing on an SM7 all the time. But we found that when we came back here, my 47 was just like mind-blowing. He loved it. We did most of Mark's last EP using the 47. But there was one song he wanted to re-sing back at home. He was back in Nashville at that point. So we got him a UAD, or the Townsend, now owned by UAD, microphone. So he got one of those and he was able to get fairly close to my chain using their 47 emulation with the UAD Neve and with DBX 160 emulation and 1176, which is basically what our chain is here. We go BAE, DBX 165, which has a variable attack and release, into an 1176. And he was able to get pretty darn close for a fraction of the cost of the $20,000 U47 that we have. Okay, so how's my vocal chain? Well, I put an RVox first of all.
Oh, burning through the sky, yeah. 200 degrees, that's why they call me Mr. Fahrenheit.
What I love about Mark is there is zero, nada, no tuning on his vocal whatsoever. Really good. There's a trim control on there which is doing nothing. There's a vocal rider.
Oh, burning through the sky.
Which I think is only going to work on the quiet things.
Having such a good time, having such a good time.
Not even on there. Let's go to the end. Yeah, so actually the vocal rider isn't set to do anything on this. I think I had it on there. Sometimes I have the vocal rider is really good for doing kind of really super quick when the vocal is really, really low, where it's like, ah! And then it's like a tiny little whispered vocal. The vocal rider, you can set it so it just quickly pulls up those quiet parts without having to use a schnizzle ton of compression. But this song is pretty much a go for it the whole time. So even on those quiet moments there, vocal rider isn't doing anything. So it could be bypassed. In fact, I'm bypassing it. All right, next up is an EQ, an REQ. It's the first time there's any EQ on the vocal, and I am getting rid of like 100 hertz, 97. Not dramatically, not a steep wall, but I'm getting rid of some extra low lows. I'm doing a little 8.5K boost. When I say a little, it's 0.9 of a dB, and it's a super wide bell, so just some air at the end, just a little bit of air on the vocal. Then another compressor. It's quite aggressive there. It's about 3 to 4 dB. But bearing in mind the ratio is only set to 2:1. The way that works, and I'm going to do a whole video on compression because there's so many videos out there and they're all super, super confusing. So I'll do you a proper compression video so we can talk about it properly. But here's like a threshold point. If the vocal or the sound, let's just say, comes up, to let 1 dB through, it has to be 2 dB over. So that's why, it's not that aggressive of a compression. Limiting, which is typically anywhere from 10, but like on 1176, you might think 20:1, means it has to go 20 dB over that threshold point before it lets 1 through. That is limiting. And then, of course, brick wall limiting is nothing. Nothing gets through. Okay, so it's relatively aggressive there, but not as aggressive as you would think. And then I doubled up that EQ, another 100 hertz and a little 7.5K boost. So I'm just opening it up a little bit more. 2 small incremental moves in high end.
Now I'm having such a good time. I'm having a ball. Don't stop me now. If you wanna have a good time, just give me a call.
Now, there's a couple of different tricks that I do. I've got some distortion here, which is quite aggressive. And then I've got the pitch change where I actually do an octave down. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over to the console here for a second. And I'm just going to open up that channel only. So have a listen to this. Now, first of all, you can hear all the effects. So I'm going to mute those. Now that's really, really quiet. So I'm just going to hope that Eric, just for schnitz and schniggles, is going to exaggerate it. So it's going to be a lot louder what you're going to hear now than it really is in the mix, but it's subtly in the mix. So I'm turning off everything. So nothing's playing. Now here's the distortion. Quite aggressive. It's the lo-fi setting. I've got it on 3%, which is actually a lot on this distortion. As you can see, it's about just slightly under a third of the total amount of distortion you can get. What I've done here is I've ran a de-esser into the distortion first. So the distortion doesn't get too carried away with the high end. Then I've got some compression to round it out. So it's hitting and it's going to be an even amount of distortion rather than just distorting on the peaks. Then I'm exaggerating the high end afterwards, but this is after de-essing. So what I like about de-essing and EQing simultaneously is like I can de-ess a signal, then boost it, and then de-ess it again. Because what it will do is it will make air or produce air around everything, but it won't take your head off. So after I boost the high end, you guessed it, I did the de-esser. And then we have the lo-fi on it. And then I actually went a little nutty using this twin tube processor, this SPL twin tube processor, which is really good. That's without it on. Now is it on? It makes it a little bit more even, a little bit more exciting across all the frequency range. So it's a combination of a lo-fi with that. Quite an aggressive amount of distortion or saturation, depending on what you want to call it. And there's a lot of discussion on that, which I don't want to have. All right, next up is the octave. As you can tell, it's really, really, really quiet. So hopefully Eric's going to boost it up. One more time. So it's really quiet in there. It's really ugly. But I use it because it kind of just gives a little bit of extra, girth to the vocal. I do it on girl vocals all the time. As soon as it's audible, it's useless. What it needs to be is just there to make it sound thicker. But if it actually starts poking its nose out, it's not good. I've done it where we mixed it a little bit too hot, like a dB above where it should be. Somebody's like, I don't like the sound of my voice. It's like, they spotted it. But there's a way to blend it in a low octave. So what I'm using is stock comes free with the with DigiDesign, with Avid. I'm sure all of your DAWs have this. And I've gone down, as you can tell, 12 semitones. So 1 octave down. Then I have a gate, which will get rid of any kind of warbly breaths and stuff like that. So I gate it. And then an EQ wiping off the top. So no weird high-end artifacts or any of that BS is going to come out because all I'm doing is letting the low end, below 600, come through. Right, last but no means least is one of my favorite tricks, and that is the Mofoda. And that is a whisper track. And I love this. We're going to do a screenshot of this Mofoda so you can see my settings. People ask me about it all the time, but it's a really good trick. So I brought all of those 3 things together, and I'm also running a de-esser into the Mofoda. It's pretty cool. So you take those 3 elements. I'm going to turn this down or I'll blow my head off. And you put it in with the lead vocal and you get this. Sky, yeah, 200 degrees, that's why they call me Mr. Fahrenheit. So it gets a little and some distortion in there. I want this to sound exciting and edgy, and that's what we got with those elements. Now, the effects that you heard playing a second ago were a lot of the printed stuff. So I've got the H3000 here, which you're going to get all of these things as well. And that's actually the vocal thickening trick where I'm detuning left and right. And I do a -3 + 3, -6 + 6, -9 + 9. So that's like this detuning effect. It's really quiet. It does not work to be loud. Don't turn it up so it's like super audible. It should be just there. If you do it gently and put it under the vocal, it will push the lead vocal forward. If you do it too loud, it'll just sound like you've got a bad chorusing effect on it. And you can try it with chorusing and flanging and all kinds of stuff. But I like this. This is using the Eventide H3000, which I think is one of the best things on the market. Okay, then I've got two different things that I got from my lexicon. Eric will have to turn this up because they're almost inaudible, but here they are.
Burning through the sky, yeah. 200 degrees, that's why they call me Mr. Fahrenheit. Yeah, I'm traveling at the speed of...
Now, one thing we do is we get rid of the breaths. We don't want the H3000. We don't need it to have a chorusy style effect on the breaths. So manually we do it, but it doesn't take very long.
Don't stop me now, I'm having...
So we don't get, don't stop me. We don't have all that stuff in. It just, it creates chaos. So just a little bit of cleanup. Now, Eric will have to turn these up, but here are the two lexicon effects that I use. In fact, I'm going to turn it up because it's inaudible. So that's the vocal plate on the PCM90. Those of you remember those, great device. And then this is the vocal magic setting on the PCM90. Both absolutely classic settings on a lexicon. For those of you that are aficionados or remember lexicons well, just great settings. So last but no means least, on the vocals here, and you'll notice at the end there's this crazy vocal effect. What I'm doing is I'm turning the vocal down, but I'm sending to the effects from a pre-fader. So what does that mean? That means I can turn the lead vocal down, but at the same time, the send to the reverbs, to the delays or the effects is unaffected because it's pre-fader. Fader's turning down, but the source, the vocal itself, is still sending to the effects. So what that does, if I solo the lead vocal, is when he does that la-di-da-di-da part at the end, you get this.
La da 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 da, la da da da, la da da da, la da da. Ooh, yeah.
Nice effect, because the vocals effects are being sent pre-fade. So I'm turning his vocal down, but the effects are staying the same. And then what I'm doing is I'm turning up the effects. So it's Bowie did it, so many people did it. Obviously Freddie did it, and we're doing it. So lead vocal, it can sound like it's da-da-da, walking away, you know, walking away from the microphone, going into the cavern behind you. It's a great effect. It's very 70s. It's freaking awesome. Send it pre-fade. And those effects are this. The first one is a reverb, which is the high end's wiped off a little bit here. It's 3.79 seconds. The second one is a slap delay. I always have a little bit of a slap delay. I've got a left and a right at different times. I don't always do that scientifically because slap delays, it's nice to have a little bit of randomness to it. Then there's a plate, and I'm using, actually this instance, I'm using the Renaissance reverb, which is known as the R verb. Normally I actually use the DigiDesign, the free Avid one that comes with Pro Tools, the plate, but this one's good as well. There's a lot of really good plates on the market. If I was on the more modern system, we would be using the Echo plate, but because this is the older Pro Tools system, we actually don't have access to the Echo plate, which is superb. Tiled room is exactly that. So you can see it's 0.65 of a second. I might favor this in the verses. When you've got a vocal that's sitting with maybe just one instrument or two, like drums, bass, and vocal, drums, bass, one guitar or vocal, I might favor the tiled room. The bigger reverbs tend to come up in volume and be more present when the mix starts to get very, very dense. Now, next up is Echo Boy, which I absolutely love. and we've got a quarter note one, and we've got an eighth note one. But what's interesting about both of these is I've got a sidechain compressor on it. So the lead vocal is sending to the compressor, which is after the reverb, or after, in this case, the delay. So what does that mean? It means I'm sending the lead vocal to the delay. The delay is bouncing all over the place, doing its magic. It's also simultaneously sending to the compressor, which is after the delay. So every time he sings, at the end of a phrase, the delay lets up a little bit and the delays get louder. It's a great, simple trick.
I'm having a ball. If you wanna have a good time, just give me a... I'm having a ball.
Not overly loud, but it's there. You can hear it a little bit there. Yeah, I haven't got the delays that loud. I'm relying a little bit more on the reverb, but it's a simple trick. It comes in at the end. There's little extra delays. I pushed them up a little bit, but it's a great trick. All right, here we are with Mark's amazing lead vocal. So we've got 3 to 6 dB worth of gain reduction going on. It's channel out, meaning EQ into compression. I like that. That is the sound of an SSL to me. It's that spankiness, as it hits in there. The auto gain function on SSL is absolute genius. Here's the compression out. In.
200 degrees, that's why they call me Mr. Fahrenheit. I'm traveling at the speed of light.
It just brings everything forward. All those little phrases come through. There's some peaks going a little bit louder, but generally everything just evens out. I mean, it's the SSL compressor. I mean, they're legendary. Okay, as far as EQ, there's a bit of 300 boost going on, just to add some body to them, but there's 100, you know, there's about 80 or 90 kind of cuts, so there's some high passing, some 300 boost. There's nothing going on in low mids above that, but there is some 6K lift, and then there's some like 12K lift. So what's happening, again, is I'm putting a little bit of 300 down there, rolling off some low lows, bit of 6, with a nice wide bell, so 6, and then some 12 over the top. So I'm just adding like air and a bit more aggression on there. And that's it, that's the sound. There's no inserts, nothing else. But pretty fantastic. I mean, he's an amazing singer. I'll take the EQ in and out for you. No EQ. Put the effects in.
200 degrees, that's why they call me Mr. Fahrenheit.
EQ in.
I'm traveling at the speed of light.
So one more thing, let's try the EQ in and out with the track. EQ in.
200 degrees, that's why they call me Mr. Fahrenheit. I'm traveling at the speed of light. I wanna make a supersonic woman of you.
Okay, EQ out. Just sounds a little nasally. Put it in. EQ back in. Just adds bite and excitement. Yep, there you go. All right, last but no means least are the background vocals, which is, I didn't sing backgrounds on this one. This one's all Steve. On the last track that we did, I was the only one that sang backgrounds, but on this one, Steve is the only one. Sometimes it's great when we blend our voices together. We're going to do that on another big Queen song that has a lot of backgrounds.
Don't stop me 'cause I'm having a good time. Yes, I'm having a...
And I just felt like with these that they needed to be a little narrower. I didn't want it to get in the way of the lead vocal. So you see, I'm quite aggressive on the EQ here. So basically about 9.5K and above, I've low passed. And then at about 150, I've high passed. So instead of being 20 to 20K, I've just kind of controlled it a little bit. It's a little bit more mid-rangey.
Don't stop me now. Don't stop me now. I don't want to stop at all.
And those are hitting the console pretty hard. and a little crunchy, and there's some additional EQ and compression on the console, which we can go and check out. The only other thing to mention is I've got a reverb here, which again, I've done the Abbey Road trick. So I've got no excessive low end and no excessive high end going into the reverb. And then the reverb is, yep, it is the D-verb. All right, so here's Steve's backgrounds.
I don't wanna stop at all.
So pretty narrowed.
Don't stop me now.
I'm actually pulling out a little bit of 400.
Stop me now. I don't wanna stop at all.
See, I'll take the EQ out.
Don't stop me now.
In,
Don't
pull some of it out.
now.
A little bit of like 1K in the mid-range and a little bit of 4.5K. So I'm getting in there, I'm pulling out some of the kind of low mids in there. I've already EQ'd the low lows out of it as well. And then I'm pushing some mid-range, some like 1K and some sort of like high mids above it, just to kind of make it a little bit more forward-facing and very different sounding to the lead vocal. I don't want it to sound like the lead vocal. So it's just kind of like, it's kind of aggressive and mid-rangey around it. And it's not typically what I would do with backgrounds, but it works really well in this instance.
Cause I'm having a good time. Yes, I'm having a good time. I don't wanna stop at all. Cause I'm having a good time. Yes, I'm having
While we're over here at the console with the mix playing, you can see we're getting about 3 to 4 dB of gain reduction. I've got the threshold wound up right as far to the right as possible. I'm hitting the console hard. I'm hitting everything hard. The meters, it's right up near the peak. Everything is hitting hard. And I'm getting 2 to 3 dB worth of gain reduction on that. My attack is set all the way to the right, and I'm using an auto release. Sometimes I'll go to the fastest release. But typically, I use the SSL auto release, and also use the 4:1 ratio. We can have a listen. With the auto, it tends to just smear it just a little bit. And I like that smear, but you can, if you want it to be just a little bit more dancing around.
There's no stopping me. I'm burning through the sky.
This is on auto.
200 degrees.
Now I'm going to go the fastest. So on that fastest release, it's letting the transients go through and letting go. It's kind of nice.
Such a good time. I'm having a ball. Don't stop me now. There's no stopping me. I'm burning through the sky. Yeah, 200 degrees. That's why they call me Mr. Fahrenheit. I'm traveling at the speed of light. I want to make a supersonic man out of you.
When you're listening back, you know, decide on whether you can hear it. On the auto, the piano just kind of came forward. The transients were nice, that it was like releasing fast enough for some of the other transients to come in. The backgrounds really came forward on the fastest release time. But on the auto, everything sort of, it wasn't just the vocals that were coming forward. The piano suddenly sounded fuller. But I know that those are the two favorite settings of most guys I know that use SSL bus compressors. If you've got other ideas, of course, try it, but that's typically what happens. And last but no means least, on the master bus, we are using some stepped mastering grade Pultecs. As you can tell, I'm a huge Steve Jackson and Pultec fan. And we've got not a lot, it's 2, and it's mastering grade, meaning it's clickable, so there's totally recallable. And got a bit of 60 hertz there with no attenuation, but 2 clicks on that is probably around about a dB. dB and a quarter. I think Steve said it was like a dB and a quarter of just 60, just a nice round, and that catches a bit of the bass guitar as well because it's pretty wide, catches the low end on the kick. But also at 12K, a boost of more like 2.5, so probably close to 1.7, 1 3/4 dB of high end at 12, and I've got it set pretty broad. No attenuation though. No attenuation whatsoever. So just really all that's happening is like a nice, not very loud, but nice bloom on the low end there, and a slightly louder, nice wide bloom on the high end there. I'll take them in and out and see if you can hear any difference.
There's no stopping me.
In at the moment.
Through the sky, yeah. 200 degrees, that's why they call me Mr. Fahrenheit. I'm traveling at the speed of light. I wanna make a supersonic man out of you. Don't stop
Out.
me now. I'm having such a good time. I'm having a ball. Don't stop me now. There's no stopping me. I'm
Keep it out.
burning through the sky, yeah.
In.
200 degrees, that's why they call me Mr. Fahrenheit. I'm traveling at the speed of light.
I mean, you hear it. Again, you hear like a little perceptible kind of volume because it's putting a couple of dB of EQ in there. It's going to get a little bit louder. Again, download the Multitracks. Try all of this stuff for yourself. Don't forget to download the Multitracks. They're free. This is all free. So I hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to download the Multitracks. Happy holiday. Happy Hanukkah, happy Christmas. I hope you're having an amazing time wherever you are in the world. Please download the Multitracks. Go back, watch the video. If you can work hybrid, try what I'm doing. If not, download them, mix them in a box, whatever is best for you. All the tracks will be consolidated. You can put them in any DAW. You'll have the drum samples in there. You'll have everything. You can have some fun with this song. We certainly did. I'm a huge fan of Queen. Well, they're my favorite band. And this is one of my favorite songs of theirs. So it was a real incredible blessing to work with such amazing musicians and record this incredible song.